when Derek looked me straight in the eye at our Thanksgiving table and said, "Your greasy mechanic hands don't deserve any credit for our success." Something inside me shifted like a gear finding its proper place. I didn't raise my voice or storm out. I simply smiled, excused myself to the garage, and made 3 phone calls that would change everything. By Monday morning, I had revoked my co-signature on their business loan, triggering an immediate repayment demand of $127,000. Sometimes the quietest moves create the loudest crashes. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. But let me take you back to that Thanksgiving afternoon, before the mask slipped off my son's face. The house smelled of turkey and Elena's old apple pie recipe that Sophia had surprisingly managed to master. Derek was carving the bird with practiced precision, telling stories about their latest customer who'd bought 3 cars in 1 week. The dealership was thriving, and everyone seemed genuinely happy. "Dad, remember that first week when we couldn't figure out why all those Chevys kept overheating?" Derek laughed, passing me the drumstick I'd always preferred since he was little. "Your diagnostic skills saved us at least 10 grand in returns." Sophia nodded enthusiastically, raising her wine glass. "Robert, we honestly couldn't have done this without you. The mechanical expertise, the down payment, everything. You're like the silent partner who makes all the difference." I felt warm inside watching my boy succeed. Elena would have been so proud, seeing him finally stable after all those years of jumping from job to job. The dealership had been her idea originally. She'd always said Derek had a gift for talking to people, making them trust him. "Just needs the right foundation," she'd whispered during one of our late-night conversations about his future. "Speaking of foundations," I said, pulling out the envelope I'd brought, "I've been thinking about expanding the service bay. Got some connections with tool suppliers who could give us wholesale prices." Inside were blueprints I'd sketched out and cost estimates totaling another $15,000 from my remaining pension fund. Derek's eyes lit up as he studied the papers. "This is incredible, Dad. Look at this, Sophia. We could handle all our own warranty work instead of farming it out. The profit margins would be insane." The conversation flowed like honey. We talked about hiring another mechanic, maybe buying a tow truck, expanding into auto body work. Derek kept calling it our business, and I felt that familiar pride swelling in my chest. At 65, I was still useful, still contributing, still part of something bigger than myself. But then Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something changed in his expression. Sophia caught his eye and gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Derek cleared his throat and set down his fork. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet dining room. "Actually, Dad, Sophia and I have some news to share." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "We've been talking to some investors from Chicago," Sophia said, her voice taking on a businesslike tone I'd never heard before. "They made us an offer for the dealership. A really good offer." My hand froze halfway to my mouth. "You're selling?" "Not exactly selling," Derek said, not meeting my eyes. "More like cashing out our equity. The investors want to buy us out completely, pay off all the loans, and we walk away clean." I set my fork down slowly. "What about the expansion plans? What about building something for the long term?" Derek and Sophia exchanged another look. This one lasted longer. "Dad," Derek said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "you have to understand, this is business, real business, not some hobby garage where you tinker with carburetors." The words hit like a wrench to the solar plexus. I felt my breath catch. Sophia leaned forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Robert, you've been wonderful, really. But let's be honest about what this is. Derek has built something amazing here with his sales skills and business acumen. The success comes from customer relationships, market positioning, strategic inventory management, things that require, well, a more sophisticated skill set." "More sophisticated than mechanical expertise?" The question came out quieter than I intended. "Dad," Derek's voice was gentler now, but somehow that made it worse. "Your greasy mechanic hands don't deserve any credit for our success. You helped with some startup costs, sure, and we're grateful. But this business succeeded because of sales ability and business intelligence, Not because someone can tell a timing belt from a serpentine belt. The silence stretched like a taut cable ready to snap. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, marking seconds that felt like hours. Sophia's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Besides, wouldn't Elena be ashamed of you still clinging to this grief, this need to feel needed? She's been gone 3 years, Robert. Maybe it's time you found your own life instead of trying to live through ours. The mention of Elena's name in that context, in that tone, did something to me that I didn't fully understand in that moment. My hands went completely numb. The room seemed to tilt slightly, like I was looking at everything through water. I stood up slowly, carefully placing my napkin beside my plate. Derek and Sophia watched me with expressions that mixed guilt and defiance, waiting for me to explode, to shout, to make a scene that would justify their cruelty. Instead, I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice steady as a level. "I'll see myself out." I walked to my truck in the driveway and sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the house where my son lived. The windows glowed warm and golden, and I could see shadows moving inside. Probably Derek and Sophia already celebrating their good fortune, their freedom from the old man's expectations. I drove home in complete silence, my mind strangely clear. It wasn't until I was sitting in my empty kitchen, looking at the framed photo of Elena on the counter, that the full weight of what had happened began to settle. This was the same Derek who'd called me crying at 2 a.m. when he was 23 and couldn't make rent. The same boy I'd co-signed for when no bank would give him a credit card. The same young man who'd moved back home for 8 months after his first business venture failed, eating my food and using my utilities while I worked 60-hour weeks to keep us both afloat. I walked to the filing cabinet in my home office and pulled out the folder labeled Derek Business. Inside were 4 years of carefully organized documents. The original $35,000 cash out from my pension fund, split into 3 transactions. $15,000 for the initial down payment on the dealership lot, $12,000 for the first inventory purchase, and $8,000 for licensing, insurance, and operating capital. Every cent documented, every transaction dated. But there was more. Monthly statements showing my co-signature on the business loan. $127,000 at 6.2% interest, with me listed as primary guarantor. Derek's credit score hadn't been good enough to qualify a loan. Receipts for equipment purchases where I'd used my contractor discounts to save them thousands. Documentation of the diagnostic computer I'd bought them for $4,300. Records of the 3 weekends I'd spent training their first mechanic because they couldn't afford proper certification courses. This was the same son for whom I'd sold Elena's engagement ring, the one her grandmother had passed down, to cover their business insurance when they were 3 months behind. The same boy who'd hugged me with tears in his eyes and promised he'd never forget what I'd sacrificed. Elena's voice echoed in my memory, not the twisted version Sophia had conjured, but her real words from our last conversation before the cancer took her. "Promise me you'll take care of him, Robert. He's got potential, but he needs guidance. Be patient with him." I had been patient. For 4 years I'd been patient. I pulled out my cell phone and stared at Elena's contact information, still saved in my favorites. Her voicemail greeting played when I called, just like it had every night for the past 3 years. Her laugh at the end always made me smile, even through the grief. "Hey, sweetheart," I said to the empty kitchen. "Our boy just told me that my greasy mechanic hands don't deserve credit for his success. What do you think about that?" Of course, Elena didn't answer, but I could imagine what she would have said. Elena had never tolerated disrespect or ingratitude, especially toward family. She would have been furious, not at Derek's success, but at his cruelty. At the way he'd twisted my love for him into something shameful. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and started adding numbers. The next morning, I was at my lawyer's office when they opened at 9 a.m. sharp. "Robert," Tom Brennan greeted me with a firm handshake. Tom had handled Elena's estate and had been our family lawyer for 15 years. "What can I do for you?" I placed the folder on his desk. "I need to understand my options regarding a business loan I co-signed." Tom reviewed the documents methodically, his expression growing more serious with each page. Robert, you realize that as the primary guarantor, you have significant rights here? You can revoke your guarantee with 30 days' notice, which would trigger an immediate repayment demand. What would that mean for Derek? If he can't secure alternative financing or pay the balance in full, the lender would begin foreclosure proceedings on the business assets. Tom leaned back in his chair. Are you sure about this? This is your son we're talking about. I thought about Derek's words, about Sophia's calculated cruelty, about Elena's ring, sold to keep their dream alive while they planned their betrayal. Tom, my son told me yesterday that my contributions to his business don't deserve recognition, that my greasy mechanic hands weren't responsible for his success. I pulled out another document, the original partnership agreement Derek had begged me to sign, giving me a 25% stake in exchange for my initial investment. He also seems to have forgotten about this. Tom whistled low as he read. Jesus, Robert. According to this, you own a quarter of the business. If they're selling, you're entitled to 25% of the proceeds. That's what I thought. But apparently, business intelligence doesn't include reading comprehension. I spent the next 2 hours with Tom, understanding every detail of my position. Derek and Sophia had made a crucial error. They'd never formally altered the partnership agreement, probably assuming I'd never assert my rights. In their minds, I was just the aging father who'd helped out with startup costs. From Tom's office, I drove directly to my bank. Mr. Klein, the loan officer recognized me immediately. How can we help you today? I need to discuss the commercial loan for Klein Auto Sales. I'm listed as the primary guarantor. The banker pulled up the account information. Yes, current balance is $127,847. Payments have been on time. Is there a problem? I'm formally revoking my guarantee, effective immediately. Please prepare the necessary documentation. The banker's eyes widened. Sir, you understand this will trigger an acceleration clause? The full balance becomes due within 30 days. I understand perfectly. By noon, the legal notice was in the mail to Derek's business address. By 2 p.m., I was at the office of Patricia Huang, the forensic accountant Tom had recommended. I need a complete audit of my son's business finances, I explained, spreading out bank statements Derek had provided during the loan application process. Specifically, I want to know if the books match the reported revenues and expenses. Patricia studied the documents with professional detachment. This will take some time, Mr. Klein. Forensic accounting isn't cheap. We're looking at probably $3,000 to $5,000 for a thorough analysis. I wrote the check without hesitation. Mrs. Huang, my late wife always told me that the truth is worth whatever it costs to find it. The call came at 6:47 p.m. while I was watching the evening news. Dad. Derek's voice was tight with panic. What the hell did you do? I got a notice from the bank today saying the loan is being called. They want $127,000 in 30 days or they're seizing the business assets. I muted the television. I revoked my guarantee, Derek. You can't do that. You can't just destroy everything I've built. According to my lawyer, I can. And according to the partnership agreement you asked me to sign, I own 25% of what you've built. Funny how you forgot to mention that when you were dividing up the sale proceeds. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Dad, look, maybe we were hasty yesterday. Maybe there's room to negotiate. Derek? I interrupted, my voice as calm as I could make it. Yesterday you told me my greasy mechanic hands don't deserve credit for your success. Today you're calling me for help. Which version of reality should I believe? I was upset, okay? The investors were pressuring us, and I said things I didn't mean. You know I appreciate everything you've done. Do I? Because your wife seemed pretty clear that Elena would be ashamed of me. Should I believe that part? Or just the convenient parts? Another long pause. Then Derek's voice, harder now. Fine. You want to play hardball? We'll get our own lawyer. You can't just sabotage our future because your feelings got hurt. The line went dead. I went back to watching the news, but my attention was elsewhere. In the garage, I could see Elena's old Honda Civic, the one I'd been restoring as a surprise for our 40th anniversary before she got sick. I've been working on it in my spare time for 3 years now, partly as therapy, partly as a way to keep her memory alive. The engine was rebuilt, the interior reupholstered, the bodywork complete. It just needed final detailing. Maybe it was time to finish it. The next morning brought a call from a lawyer I didn't recognize. "Mr. Klein, this is James Morrison representing Derek and Sophia Klein. My clients are prepared to file a lawsuit against you for intentional interference with business relations and emotional distress. Your actions regarding the loan guarantee constitute malicious." I hung up. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Different number. "Mr. Klein? This is Detective Barnes with Detroit PD. We've had a complaint filed against you for elder abuse and financial exploitation. I need to ask you some questions." This was Derek's nuclear option, claiming I was mentally incompetent, that someone was manipulating me into revoking the loan guarantee. It was desperate and stupid, but it showed how far he was willing to go. "Detective, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Should I bring my lawyer?" "That's up to you, sir. But I should tell you this complaint seems pretty thin. Your son claims you're being financially exploited, but he can't identify who's supposedly exploiting you or how." The investigation lasted exactly one conversation. I showed Detective Barnes my financial records, demonstrated my mental competence by discussing current events and performing simple calculations, and explained the business relationship clearly and rationally. The detective left after 20 minutes, looking embarrassed that he'd wasted both our time. But Derek's desperation was escalating. That evening, I discovered that someone had created fake Google reviews for my old garage, which I'd closed after Elena's death but still maintained the listing. 5 one-star reviews had appeared, all posted within an hour of each other, all claiming I was a dishonest mechanic who overcharged customers and did shoddy work. The reviews were clearly fake. They referenced services I'd never offered and mentioned equipment I'd never owned. But they were designed to damage my reputation in the automotive community, where word of mouth was everything. I screenshot each review and forwarded them to Tom Brennan. "Add defamation to the list," I told him. Patricia Huang called on Friday with her preliminary findings. "Mr. Klein, I need to ask you some questions about your son's business practices. According to these bank statements, Klein Auto Sales has been reporting significantly higher revenues to potential buyers than what they've been reporting for tax purposes." I wasn't surprised. How significant? "They've been inflating revenues by roughly 30% for the sale negotiations. That's fraud, Mr. Klein. They're essentially lying to the Chicago investors about the business's profitability." But there was more. Patricia had discovered that Derek and Sophia had been systematically undervaluing trade-in vehicles, keeping the difference as unreported cash income. They'd also been charging customers for extended warranties through a third-party company, but pocketing the premium payments instead of actually purchasing the coverage. "Your son has built his business on fraud, Mr. Klein. The success he's so proud of is largely fictional." I asked Patricia to prepare a comprehensive report documenting every irregularity she'd found. The cost was $4,200, but it was worth every penny for the ammunition it provided. Derek's lawsuit was filed the following Monday. I was officially being sued by my own son for intentional infliction of emotional distress, tortious interference with business relations, and breach of fiduciary duty. The damages sought were $250,000, roughly twice what the business was actually worth. Tom Brennan was practically grinning when he called. "Robert, your son's lawyer just handed us the best possible outcome. By filing this lawsuit, Derek has opened his business finances to discovery. We can now subpoena every record, every bank statement, every transaction for the past 4 years. And Patricia's audit becomes Exhibit A in our defense. We're not just going to win this case, Robert. We're going to destroy them." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the bank had begun foreclosure proceedings on the dealership, and the Chicago investors had withdrawn their offer after learning about the pending litigation. Derek called twice more, first to beg, then to threaten. I didn't answer either call, but Sophia decided to try a different approach. She appeared at my door on a Tuesday evening, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the kind of apologetic expression she'd probably practiced in the mirror. "Robert, may I come in? I brought you some dinner. I know this has been hard on everyone." I stepped aside to let her enter, curious to see what angle she'd try. "I need to apologize," she began, setting the casserole on my kitchen counter. "What I said about Elena was unforgivable. I was nervous about the sale, stressed about the investors, and I lashed out. Derek didn't mean what he said either. We both know this business couldn't have succeeded without your help." I poured myself a cup of coffee and didn't offer her any. "The thing is," she continued, "we've got a chance to fix this. The investors are willing to wait for the legal issues to be resolved, but we need to settle this family dispute quickly. Derek's prepared to offer you $50,000 as recognition of your contributions. That's fair, right? $50,000. Yes, I know it seems less than the 25% partnership share, but you have to understand, most of the business's value is in goodwill and customer relationships, things that Derek built. The actual tangible assets aren't worth that much." I sipped my coffee and studied her face. She looked confident, like she'd found the magic number that would make me go away quietly. "Sophia, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you actually believe the things you say? Or do you just think I'm stupid enough to believe them?" Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I think you're a lonely old man who's confusing business with charity," she said. "Derek feels sorry for you, but he's not going to let sentiment destroy his future. And the partnership agreement? The one that gives me 25% ownership. A piece of paper Derek signed when he was desperate. Any court will recognize that your actual contribution was minimal compared to the work Derek put in building the business." I nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And the $35,000 from my pension fund? The co-signature that made the loan possible? The equipment purchases, the training, the diagnostic expertise that prevented thousands in returns? All minimal? Look, Robert, you helped with startup costs. We appreciate that. But the business succeeded because Derek is a gifted salesman with natural business instincts. Your role was important initially, but Derek outgrew needing your help years ago. Is that why he kept asking for it?" Sophia's composure cracked completely. "You want to know the truth? Derek felt obligated to include you because you're his father. But this business was always his vision, his achievement. You were just the bank." She stood up, leaving the casserole untouched on my counter. "The $50,000 offer stands until the end of the week. After that, we fight this in court, and you'll end up with nothing except legal bills you can't afford." After she left, I called Tom Brennan. "They offered me $50,000 to settle. Based on Patricia's audit, your 25% share of the actual business value should be around $75,000. But Robert, if we go to trial and prove fraud, you might end up with a lot more than that." "What do you mean?" "If the judge finds that Derek built his business through fraudulent practices using your money and credit, there's precedent for awarding the victim full restitution plus punitive damages. You could potentially end up owning the entire business." I thought about Elena, about her ring sold to keep Derek's dream alive while he planned to exclude me from its success, about the nights I'd lain awake worrying about the loan I'd guaranteed, while Derek and Sophia made plans that didn't include me. "Let's go to trial, Tom." The discovery phase was brutal for Derek and Sophia. Tom's subpoenas uncovered everything Patricia had found and more. Bank records showing systematic fraud dating back 3 years. Customer complaints about fake warranties they'd paid for but never received. IRS documents proving they'd been underreporting income while inflating revenues for potential buyers. But the most damaging evidence was a series of text messages between Derek and Sophia from 6 months earlier, discussing how to manage the old man until they could complete the sale. The messages made it clear they'd been planning to exclude me from the proceeds for months, referring to me as dead weight, and joking about my pathetic attachment to the garage. One message from Sophia particularly stood out. "Once we close the Chicago deal, we can finally cut loose from Robert's guilt trips about Elena. I'm so tired of pretending to care about his feelings." Derek's response, "2 more months and we're free. Dad will probably cry about being abandoned, but honestly, it's time he moved to a nursing home anyway." When Tom showed me these messages in his office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Elena's death. Absolute, crystalline clarity about what needed to happen. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February. Derek and Sophia sat at the plaintiff's table looking confident and well-dressed, their lawyer whispering reassurances about settling this quickly. They had no idea what was coming. Tom opened with Patricia's forensic audit, methodically walking the judge through 4 years of fraudulent business practices. The underreported income, the fake warranties, the inflated revenue reports to investors, all documented with bank statements and customer complaints. Derek's lawyer objected repeatedly, claiming the audit was irrelevant to the emotional distress lawsuit. But Judge Martinez allowed it as evidence of Derek's character and credibility. Then Tom introduced the partnership agreement, the loan documents, and my financial records showing the $35,000 investment. He walked through each contribution I'd made, each sacrifice, each time Derek had called begging for help that I'd provided without question. "Your Honor," Tom said, "the defendants want this court to believe that Mr. Robert Klein is a vindictive old man who sabotaged his son's business out of spite. The evidence shows exactly the opposite. Mr. Klein is a victim of systematic financial fraud perpetrated by family members who betrayed his trust and exploited his love for his son." Derek's lawyer tried to argue that the business's success was entirely due to Derek's sales ability, that my contributions were minimal and my expectations unreasonable. Then Tom played his trump card. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit J, text messages between the defendants from September of last year." He read the messages aloud, each word falling into the courtroom silence like a hammer blow. Derek's face went white. Sophia stared at her hands. "These messages," Tom continued, "show that the defendants began planning to exclude Mr. Klein from the business sale at least 6 months before the incident they claim caused them emotional distress. They refer to him as dead weight and joke about his pathetic attachment to his deceased wife. This is not the behavior of loving family members who were hurt by an elderly relative's vindictive actions. This is the behavior of con artists who got caught." Judge Martinez listened to Derek's testimony with obvious skepticism. Derek tried to explain away the text messages as venting and claimed the fraud allegations were exaggerated, but he couldn't explain why he'd hidden the partnership agreement or why he'd inflated revenues for the Chicago investors. Sophia's testimony was even worse. She tried to play the victim, claiming I was financially abusive and emotionally manipulative, but Tom demolished her credibility by reading more of her text messages, including several where she bragged about managing the old fool and keeping me desperate for family contact, so I'd continue providing financial support. When it was my turn to testify, Tom kept it simple. "Mr. Klein, why did you revoke your loan guarantee?" "Because my son told me that my contributions to his business didn't deserve recognition. Because my daughter-in-law told me my deceased wife would be ashamed of my grief. Because I realized they'd been lying to me for months about their intentions. What did you hope to accomplish?" I looked directly at Derek as I answered. "I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't build success on someone else's sacrifice and then pretend they don't exist when it's time to collect the rewards. Do you regret your decision?" "No. I regret that it was necessary." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Not only did he dismiss Derek's lawsuit, he awarded me $15,000 in legal fees and found Derek and Sophia guilty of perjury for their false testimony about the text messages and financial records. But more importantly, he ruled that the partnership agreement was valid and enforceable, that Derek and Sophia had committed fraud in their business practices, and that I was entitled to full restitution for my investment plus punitive damages. The total judgment was $127,000. Exactly the amount of the business loan Derek could no longer afford to pay. Judge Martinez's final words still echo in my memory. "This case represents a profound betrayal of family trust. Mr. Derek Klein and Ms. Sophia Klein systematically exploited an elderly relative's love and generosity, then attempted to use the legal system to silence him when he defended himself. Their behavior has been reprehensible from start to finish. The business folded within 30 days. Without the loan guarantee and facing the judgment against them, Derek and Sophia couldn't secure alternative financing. The dealership was auctioned to pay debts, and everything they'd worked for disappeared. Derek called me once after the auction, his voice hollow with defeat. "I hope you're happy, Dad. I hope destroying your own son's life was worth it." "Derek," I said quietly, "I didn't destroy your life. I just stopped letting you destroy mine." He hung up, and I haven't heard from him since. 6 months later, I ran into Sophia at the grocery store. She was working behind the customer service counter, wearing a blue vest and a name tag. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she looked exhausted. Our eyes met across the store, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she looked away and pretended not to see me. I bought my groceries and left without saying a word. There was nothing left to say. The judgment money, combined with the settlement from Derek's business insurance, gave me enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I sold most of my heavy tools to a young mechanic just starting out, reminded me of myself 40 years ago, and kept only the basics. Elena's Honda Civic was finally finished. I'd had it painted her favorite shade of blue and installed a modern sound system while keeping the classic exterior design. On a warm Saturday morning in May, I loaded it with camping gear and headed west. I drove Elena's car across the country, stopping at all the places we talked about visiting but never had the time or money to see. The Grand Canyon, where I scattered some of her ashes as the sun set over the red rocks. Yellowstone, where I camped for a week and remembered what silence sounded like. The Pacific Coast Highway, where I drove with the windows down and felt her presence in the salt air. At each stop, I called the young mechanic who'd bought my tools and checked on his progress. He was struggling with the same challenges I'd faced decades earlier, but he had the hunger and determination that reminded me why I'd loved the work. I started sending him customers, people I met on the road who needed honest automotive work. Word spread in the traveling community about the young mechanic in Detroit who did quality work at fair prices, just like his mentor had taught him. In a roadside diner outside Flagstaff, I met a retired teacher named Margaret who was driving cross-country in her late husband's RV. We talked about loss and healing, about children who disappoint you and dreams that come true in unexpected ways. "Do you miss your old life?" she asked over coffee and pie. I thought about Derek, about the business we'd built together and the way it had ended. I thought about the grandchildren I'd probably never know, the family gatherings that would happen without me. "I miss the life I thought I had," I said finally. "But I don't miss the lies." Margaret nodded. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that the people we love most are capable of hurting us most deeply. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. 6 months later, she called to tell me she decided to sell her house and buy a smaller RV so she could travel full-time. "Life's too short to spend it waiting for other people's approval," she said. I understood exactly what she meant. A year after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Derek, postmarked from Phoenix. "Dad," he wrote, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you that Sophia and I are getting divorced. The stress of losing the business, the legal problems, the bankruptcy, it was too much. We blamed each other, then we blamed you, but eventually we had to face the truth about what we'd done. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand how I became someone who could treat you the way I did. She says I was never taught healthy boundaries, that I learned to see love as something you could take without giving back. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I understand now what Mom saw in you, the strength to do what's right even when it costs you everything. I'm working construction now, honest work that reminds me of the values you tried to teach me. Maybe someday I'll be worthy of calling you Dad again. Love, Derek." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in the box with Elena's photos and letters. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't something you gave or received. It was something you lived. I never wrote back, but I kept the letter. 2 years after leaving Detroit, I settled in a small town in Montana where the mountains reminded me of Elena's strength and the wide skies felt like possibilities she'd never had the chance to explore. I bought a small house with a 2-car garage and started doing restoration work for classic car enthusiasts. The work was different now. Not the desperate scramble to pay bills or support ungrateful family members, but the pure joy of bringing beautiful machines back to life. Each project was a conversation with history, a collaboration between my skills and someone else's dream. Elena's Honda Civic sits in my garage now, fully restored and perfectly maintained. I drive it every Sunday to the little church where I've started attending services. Not because I found God, but because I found community. People who accept me as I am, not as what I can provide for them. The pastor, a young woman named Sarah who reminds me of Elena's spirit, asked me once why I never remarried. I had 40 years with the love of my life, I told her. Some people never get 1 year of that kind of happiness. I'm not greedy enough to ask for more, but I am grateful enough to recognize what I have. A home that's truly mine. Work that feeds my soul instead of draining it. Peace instead of constant anxiety about other people's approval. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Derek had simply acknowledged my contributions, if he'd honored the partnership agreement and included me in his success. We might still be a family. He might have learned that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. But maybe this was the only way he could learn who he really was, stripped of the safety net I'd provided for so long. Maybe losing everything was the first step toward finding something real. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. I don't know if I want to. What I know is that Elena would be proud of me for finally standing up for myself. For refusing to let love become a weapon others could use against me. For choosing dignity over desperation. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't destroying Derek's business or winning the lawsuit. It was discovering that I could be happy without the people who'd convinced me I needed them more than they needed me. Justice, I learned, isn't about punishment. It's about balance. It's about ensuring that actions have consequences and that love flows both ways. On quiet evenings in my Montana garage, working on some collector's dream car while Elena's Honda gleams in the background, I sometimes feel her presence so strongly it takes my breath away. Not the bitter, twisted version Sophia had conjured, but the real Elena. Proud, fierce, and utterly devoted to fairness. "You did good, Robert," she seems to whisper in the sound of the mountain wind. "You finally learned the difference between being needed and being used. And for the first time in years, I sleep peacefully through the night." If you liked this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions in the comments below. Have you ever experienced financial betrayal from family members? How did you handle it? Your stories help others who might be facing similar situations.